There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from work. It doesn't come from physical strain or long days. It shows up even on quiet mornings after a full night of sleep, when everything around you seems calm. And if you listen closely, you realize it's not your body asking for rest. It's something deeper that has been carrying too much for too long. If this feeling has ever crossed your day without a clear reason, stay with this reflection. Sometimes, understanding the weight changes how we carry it. There was a time when exhaustion made sense. You worked hard, you raised children, you solved problems that came one after another. At the end of those days, being tired felt earned. It had a clear cause. And more importantly, it had a clear solution. Rest. And then begin again. But this kind of tiredness is different. It doesn't go away with sleep. It doesn't respond to a slower schedule. It lingers, even on days when nothing particularly difficult has happened. And that is what makes it confusing. You begin to notice it in small ways. You sit down to relax, but your mind doesn't follow. It keeps moving, reviewing conversations, replaying decisions, quietly scanning for things that might go wrong. Not urgently, not anxiously, just constantly. A low, steady hum in the background of your thoughts. You also notice how even simple decisions feel heavier than they used to. Not impossible, but requiring more energy than before. Choosing what to do with your day, responding to a message, deciding whether to get involved in something. It all takes a little more effort. And you start to wonder why. Because from the outside, your life may appear calmer than it once was. Fewer responsibilities, fewer urgent demands. And yet, inside, there is a different kind of load. If you felt this quiet, persistent heaviness that doesn't match your current circumstances, pause here for a moment, because recognizing it is the first step toward understanding it. There is also the way you react to other people's problems now. You still care, deeply, but instead of stepping in immediately, there's a hesitation. Not from indifference, but from something closer to fatigue. A quiet calculation. Do I have the energy for this? This question didn't exist in the same way before. You used to respond without thinking. Now, you measure. You also begin to notice that certain conversations drain you more quickly than they used to. Repetition, especially. Hearing the same complaints, the same unresolved patterns in others, it creates a subtle weariness. Not because you lack empathy, but because you recognize how little control you actually have over changing those patterns. And that awareness changes how you engage. There are moments when you choose silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've said it before. And you understand now that saying it again may not change anything. That silence is not weakness, it is experience. Another shift appears in how you relate to your own past. Memories come back, not always as sharp pain, but as a kind of quiet residue. Things you handled, things you endured, decisions you made under pressure. At the time, you moved through them because you had to. Now, with more space, they return in softer but more persistent ways. And each one carries a small emotional weight. Not enough to overwhelm you, but enough, over time, to accumulate. You may also find that your patience has changed. Not disappeared, but narrowed. You tolerate less unnecessary conflict, less noise, less complication. What once felt manageable now feels excessive. And this, too, can be misunderstood. Others might see it as withdrawal, but internally, it feels like conservation. Energy is no longer something you spend freely. It is something you protect. If any part of this reflection reminds you of a moment, perhaps a time recently when you felt unusually drained after something small, or when you chose to step back instead of engage, hold that moment gently, because it points to something important. This tiredness is not a failure. It is not a sign that you are becoming weaker. It is the result of carrying responsibility, awareness, and emotional labor for a very long time. And unlike physical work, emotional weight does not always have a clear endpoint. It builds quietly, year after year, through relationships, through expectations, through being the one others rely on, even when no one explicitly asks. This is where many people misunderstand themselves. They try to solve this tiredness the way they used to solve everything else, by doing something. Resting more, staying busy, distracting themselves. But this kind of fatigue does not respond to activity or inactivity alone, because it is not rooted in what you are doing now. It is rooted in what you have carried over time. If you've reached this point and something inside you recognizes this, not just intellectually, but emotionally, take a moment to acknowledge it. Not to fix it, just to see it clearly, because clarity changes how you respond. There is a difference between being tired and being depleted. Tiredness can be restored. Depletion requires something else. It requires release. But release is not always straightforward, because much of what you carry is tied to identity, to being reliable, to being strong, to being the one who doesn't collapse under pressure. Letting go of that, even partially, can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. And yet, this stage of life begins to ask a different question. Not, how much can you handle? But what are you willing to continue carrying? And this is where boundaries begin to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but internally. You start to choose where your energy goes. More deliberately, more carefully. You may say no more often. or simply say less. You may step back from situations that once felt obligatory, not out of resentment, but out of recognition that your energy is finite, and that not everything deserves it. This shift can feel subtle from the outside, but internally it is significant, because it marks a transition from endurance to discernment, and that transition changes everything. You are no longer proving how much you can take. You are deciding what is worth taking on. This is also where a deeper kind of self-respect begins to form, not based on productivity, not based on how needed you are, but based on how honestly you respond to your own limits. And limits at this stage are not weaknesses. They are signals that guide you toward a more sustainable way of living. If you've been listening closely, you may begin to realize something important. This tiredness is not something to fight against. It is something to listen to, because within it, there is information about what no longer fits, about what has been carried for too long, about what is ready to be set down. And setting things down does not mean giving up. It means adjusting, adapting, allowing your life to reflect not just what you can do, but what you choose to continue doing. This is where many people find a quieter form of strength, not in pushing through exhaustion, but in recognizing when pushing is no longer necessary, and choosing instead to move differently, more slowly, perhaps, but more intentionally. As you move forward, this feeling may not disappear entirely, but your relationship to it can change. Instead of seeing it as a problem to solve, you may begin to see it as a guide, a quiet indicator of where your energy is being used and where it is being drained. And with that awareness, small shifts become possible. Not dramatic changes, but meaningful ones. Choosing rest without guilt. Choosing distance without explanation. Choosing presence in moments that truly matter, and letting go of those that do not. Peak Mind Lab thanks you for listening and being part of this reflection. And if there is one thing to carry with you from this moment, let it be this: you are not simply tired. You are responding, in a deeply human way, to a lifetime of carrying. And learning what to release may be the most important work you do next.